What's up, everybody? I'm Ryan Thomas, back again to do another episode of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I wanted to do it at 2 o'clock today, but I have other arrangements that I have to meet for that time clock, or time slot, I should say. So I am going on right now. It is 11:41. It is February 22nd, I believe, 2017. This year has gone by very fast so far, and I've really enjoyed posting stuff lately on Facebook Live. So if you have not checked out my stuff on Facebook Live, my Facebook, obviously, I'm Ryan Thomas. You can add me on there. Going live a lot on Bills Fanatics, BF, the Facebook page, where I've interacted with Bills fans about the Buffalo Bills, what direction they should head in, where they should go from here, and every situation that will be apparent for the 2017 off season, which starts in just a matter of a couple weeks. So, very interested to see what directions they go in. I've made my thoughts clear on that, and I'll talk about that more as the weeks go on. Today's show, I'm going to be talking about mixed martial arts only. This is an MMA show for today. The three topics that I chose to talk about are Mike Goldberg, UFC 209, what I expect for UFC 209, and the fallout that was at Bellator 170. So this is part one of the show today, and I want to talk about Mike Goldberg, the now former UFC play-by-play commentator for the Ultimate Fighting Championship, a guy that was a integral part of the mixed martial arts puzzle for the better part of the last 15 to 20 years. The UFC decided that they needed to continue the budget cuts of the company, and Mike Goldberg was one of the casualties. His contract was up. The UFC decided not to renew that contract, and I thought originally, maybe it was for the better. There were moments where Mike Goldberg made, some mistakes in his career, but, for me to nitpick a guy that's on that level would be insane. It'd be like me, pretending that I'm, something that, that I have actually, if I've worked on that level before with Mike Goldberg, then it would make sense, but I'm not going to do that. But, Dana White made it clear that, he needed to move on, and that they were not going to renew his contract. And I think that that's a real shame. When talking about Mike Goldberg, he's one of the few guys that, excuse me, one of the few guys that was a real integral part in building MMA into what it is today. You look at every single highlight reel, you look at every single UFC preview up until UFC 207, Mike Goldberg's voice was heard on virtually every one since Zuffa decided to purchase the company. So I anticipated that Mike Goldberg would always be a part of the UFC with Joe Rogan. They had a great camaraderie together as a play-by-play and color commentating tandem. And I anticipated that they would, stick together. Really seemed like they were finally starting to find their footing together. And now the UFC has a three-man commentating team of John Anik, Joe Rogan, and DC, or John Anik, Joe Rogan, and Dominic Cruz. I don't know if that is realistically a good idea. The audience is used to hearing two voices rather than three, and the UFC has tried this in years past, where they went from Mike Goldberg and Joe Rogan with Randy Couture to Mike Goldberg, Joe Rogan, and Ken Shamrock. So that was a long time ago. That was a different time, a different era, and I thought that we would see Mike Goldberg and Joe Rogan together for quite some time. Now that they are not, it's going to definitely be a change. And I haven't actually watched the first pay-per-view since Mike Goldberg departed from the UFC. It was UFC 208. I did not watch it because I was at my father's wedding, but I didn't miss much. Holly Holm and Jermaine Durandamy, that was not an entertaining fight. For a card to not be that entertaining, you would assume that, one of the reasons why was because of the fights. But from what I heard, it was because of the fact that there was that three-man commentating team that just was not as entertaining as Mike Goldberg and Joe Rogan. I don't know if the UFC is going to look to bring him back. I thought that they would. I thought that they would bring him back on his contract, when his contract came to a close. But it appears as if Mike Goldberg could be heading to different pastures in the NHL as the voice of the Las Vegas Golden Knights for the NHL. So that would be a great opportunity for him. I wish the guy luck. I can honestly say that, my fandom, my appreciation for the sport of mixed martial arts would not be what it is today if it wasn't for a guy like Mike Goldberg. I remember often, many a times, his great calls inside the cage, inside the UFC pay-per-views, just like that, it's all over, here we go, just catchphrases like that, I've, been trying to come up with my own catchphrases for my commentating career, and he's a guy that I've looked at a lot within the last few months to kind of, take tidbits from and build off of what he kind of established as a commentator. So I, wish him all the luck in the world. Just one second, gotta take a drink. Excuse me. I wish him all the luck in the world. I hope that he does whatever it is that his heart desires. I would hope that he would stay in mixed martial arts. I'd want him to stay in mixed martial arts. I'd want him to possibly go to Bellator if that was a possibility. But even in Bellator, if he were to go to Bellator, what would that do to his legacy as a commentator with the UFC? Would he be able to carry over the same catchphrases in the UFC to Bellator? I don't know if he would do that. I don't know if that is an option for him. Maybe he needs a new chapter in his broadcasting career. Maybe going to Las Vegas would be that chapter. Commentating for the Golden Knights would be that chapter. I know Joe Rogan is going to miss him. Joe Rogan kind of brings to the table the actual technicalities within MMA, where Mike Goldberg was the guy that was the drawing power to the casual fan, the usual play-by-play guy. But as time went on, he brought more to the table. He started to understand the sport. It's not like he didn't know what he was talking about at all. There were just moments where he made slip-ups, and it's very easy for that to happen when you're commentating live. It's very easy for that to happen. So I anticipate that he will somehow stay in the sport of MMA. I don't know how. If he were to go to Bellator, though, that would be interesting. This is another guy that the UFC has kind of let go for really virtually no reason at all. They say that it was because of budget cuts when they're trying to make up for the $4 billion that they purchased, that WMEIMG purchased the company for. And there's guys like Stitch Duran, and there was the Ariel Helwani thing, and Randy Couture, and so on. And there's so many, Tito Ortiz. There's so many guys that have been blacklisted from the UFC, and you scratch your head and wonder why. That at the root of that has spawned other careers and other avenues for fighters to take, such as Bellator. So I don't know if Mike Goldberg would jump ship and do that, but in his interview with Ariel Helwani, he talked about how he didn't even get a call from Dana White, how he didn't even hear anything from Dana White pertaining to him being let go. It was just, hey, we're not going to renew your contract, and it wasn't even coming from Dana White. It was coming from the head offices at Zuffa. So, I thought Mike Goldberg deserved a lot better than that. He should have had some sort of a tribute, a swan song, and I never really, it's kind of an old news story because it happened in December, but, in thinking about it and in watching, fight after fight back in the day within the UFC, recently I've been watching a lot of tape on commentating and stuff, just analyzing the commentary on the UFC's broadcasts, And Mike Goldberg was a guy that is there every single time, making an impact on every broadcast, making it unique to every broadcast, and to every different circumstance. There's the Rampage Jackson knockout when he knocked out Vanderlei Silva, when Conor McGregor knocked out Chad Mendes, when Conor McGregor knocked out Jose Aldo, that come to mind recently. And then there's Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre, Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, Randy Couture, all those guys that he had the privilege of commentating their fights. He's got to feel pretty lucky that he's got over 3,000, 4,000 fights, what it seems like, that he commentated for. But I didn't think it was time for that show to end, for that chapter in his career to end, and it's unfortunate, very unfortunate. So I wanted to say to Mike Goldberg, not that he's listening, but to all the MMA fans that are new MMA fans, recognize Mike Goldberg as a guy that they should recognize Mike Goldberg as a guy that was a huge part of the UFC for a long time, that is partially one of the reasons why the sport is where it is today. So that was my take on the departure of Mike Goldberg from the UFC. That was part 1 of the Thomas Take Sports podcast. Tune into part 2. I'm going to give my prediction on UFC 209, March 4th, live on pay-per-view.